Our next guest is one of the most sought-after film actors in the world today. He succeeded in breaking his ironclad Hollywood stereotype James Bond image and emerged as an acclaimed actor. And here's something about him that no one knows except probably you and me. We nearly lost this man to a 1953 Mr. Universe title. I speak of Sean Connery. We welcome you. Thank
you very much.
Mr. Universe,
yeah.
Weightlifting, bodybuilding.
Yes, but it was a different league that I was in. I was in the Mr. Universe, but when I did bodybuilding and weightlifting in Scotland, it was combined with soccer and running and swimming and many other events. And but I came to London, and of course it was absolutely shattered to find that some of these chaps wouldn't run in case they lost some of their bulk, and it was a great disillusionment for me. But the one thing that came out of it was I heard about these auditions for South Pacific at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and so I went along and auditioned then as an actor. And that's how I started.
You started in that way. I have read that you dropped out of school. You know, I know that you hate. Wait, let me back up. I have read that you hate press agents. That you, and in fact, I'll even take an exact quote here. They're manipulating parasites. They create monstrous images. You've said that among other things about press agents.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure I did.
Now, it's important for you to understand that because some of the material I read in preparing for meeting you today might have come from press agents.
Yes.
If it did, then just point it out. But I read that you left school at age 13 and are essentially a self-educated man who reads encyclopedias, has them delivered to his home. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Why do you delve into encyclopedias as a source of reading?
Well, it's not just encyclopedias. Yeah. I mean, the fact is that I was born in 1930 at the time of the Depression in Scotland. People marched to London, and it wasn't a particularly welcome time to appear on the scene. And then leading up to then was the war starting, so by the time I was 9, it was 1939, and then the schooling was rather fragmentary in Scotland because of the problems of evacuation and school teachers having to go to the war. And so I started work then and caught school because we had to go to different houses for schooling, and one wasn't always welcome in the different houses. And then I left at 13.
Left school at age 13?
Yeah, well, that was 1943 in the war, and so I got a job within a year driving a horse, and delivering, you know, coal, milk, and different jobs. Because most of the men were away, you see, and then demobilization took place, and so when they came back, we had to find other jobs, and so I went to the Navy at 16.
When you were working these odd jobs, delivering milk and so forth during the war, since today actually is Veterans Day and we commemorate it, did you want to be off fighting at that young age? Did you wish that somehow you could have been a little older looking and gone off to war yourself?
Well, one was very conscious of that. I mean, my father was too old, so he went to munitions to work in the west of Scotland, and I volunteered for 12 years in the Navy, and I went off at 16 to boy service, and I was out at 19 with ulcers.
Ulcers?
Yeah.
What gave you ulcers?
Well, the Navy.
The Navy? I mean, was it that you didn't like ships? You didn't like living with all those men? You didn't like sleeping in a hammock? What was it?
No, I think I was sort of under the impression that I was enjoying it. I obviously wasn't. But I think that in many instances, one is very aware. I think there are certain people who are very good material for the services and some people who are not. And I don't think I'm particularly good material for the services. I mean, I was a boy seaman, and then I would have to be an ordinary seaman and hopefully reach the dizzy height of able seaman, or perhaps a leading seaman or a petty officer. There's always somebody
next,
in the hierarchy.
yeah.
And I obviously was not enjoying it. My idea was more of a fantasy, I think, than the reality, and I got ulcers.
Would you say that essentially your life has been the projection of a fantasy, that you began to start acting and you've ended up as such a successful star and so forth? Has it been pretty much a fantasy trip all the way along?
Well, I use the term fantasy. I mean, it's really just the terminology. It can mean anything. I mean, what is your fantasies are kind of dreams. Well, dreams are ideas or imagination, and the only person that really sees them and knows them is yourself. Certainly at that age, one keeps it very much to yourself. And so you go about on your own particular drive or wavelength, and it's a part of you. So I don't know whether fantasy begins and reality ends.
I'll remember that. I think that's pretty healthy, because fantasies can be a lot of fun. You know, a lot of your fans, the fans who grew to know and like and even love you when you were playing the James Bond character, found it difficult to understand why you hated the character so much after a short period of time.
Well,
because you really did.
No, I didn't. This is another. You see, one of the problems that you talk about my quotation about the press. I've had a press representative,
whatever, press agent.
I had on trial, and I found out my instinct was not to have one, and I made many mistakes because I didn't. And then I tried one, and I haven't got one. I'd rather make the mistakes and go with my instincts in that area, only because I think probably too personal or private in my ways to involve myself the proper way to project what it is that is best
for you,
for me, or for the image. And consequently, in a situation like these constant references to my hating the James Bond character, that's not true at all. I worked extremely hard on them, and at the beginning, as an actor, it was from the first one had kind of created what it was about in terms of the humor and certain veins of reality in it. And then it became much too important and too difficult and too complicated, the internal fightings, and the producers were extremely greedy, and I think they were under the impression that eventually, well, one would always settle for some kind of price.
They could just plug you in, they'd have another James Bond movie with Sean Connery.
And I think they were rather stupid. And consequently, when you're doing a picture, and they were fantastically successful financially and enjoyable and what have you, but the background of complicated mistimed operations that got longer and longer, that my involvement would be anything up to 6 months in the film, and it was really, I found very restraining and conflicting with myself in terms of wanting to do other things. I could never plan.
It's a big chunk of anybody's life, I think, to commit themselves for 6 months. You impress me as essentially being a loner, a loner. Would you agree with that?
The only group I've ever been involved in was the Navy.
And that gave you ulcers. Okay, we'll take a break and we'll be back with Sean Connery. We want to talk about his new film, which opened yesterday, The Next Man, after this. Welcome back. Sean Connery is with us, and the film opened yesterday called The Next Man, which stars Sean Connery. It's his latest film. In this film, he plays a minister of state from Saudi Arabia who's named Ali Abdul Mohsen. Tell us what you did to go from being a Scotsman to create a man from the Middle East in terms of the acting involved.
Well, I came to New York, and I was discussing another project altogether with Marty Bregman, who's the producer and who had the initial idea for the story. And I just happened to read the projection of it, and I liked the idea. And what one was really trying to do, without going for the specifics of the Saudi Arabian character, as much as making a very understandable, completely with all human frailty,
very human character,
human character, you know, in terms of his pleasures and temptations and attitude, decisions, and what have you, rather than going for, you know, such a detailed reality.
You know, it's so funny, speaking of reality, I went to see the film last night, and it has gotten mixed reviews in the paper. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was drawn into it. I was compelled by it. I went home liking it, and liking you and Cornelia Sharp in it. I thought it was a really good production, but something happened in that film that just set me off laughing. When a film is shot in New York, you get to, you know, obviously Marty Bregman used a lot of locations, a lot of places around the city, and a lot of people in the film are people we know who've been on Midday, who've been in these various scenes. A friend of mine named Robert Woolley, who is a vice president at Park Burnett Galleries, is the auctioneer in the scene where Cornelia Sharp is one, and I actually, by actual computation figure, he had more lines than Cornelia Sharp in that one scene, as well as having a close-up and everything like that. Did you enjoy shooting all around the world? So you were... in about 11 different locations?
Yes, it's a very ambitious film, I think, in terms of what you can do today and move an entire unit to all these places. I mean, England twice, Ireland twice, Morocco, the Bahamas, Germany, France, New York. New York was the hub of the story, being the United Nations, and in exteriors and interiors here. We shot over in actually the largest studios in America in Queens.
Yes.
You know, it's marvelous. I was just talking about it to your tree man there.
And some of the largest trees in America are in Queens as well, but not in Brooklyn. So it was an enjoyable experience traveling around. As you say, it's an ambitious, highly ambitious project. The thing that I find myself wondering about more and more, particularly after seeing Marathon Man. Have you seen Marathon Man?
No, it's on my list here. I'm going to
go see. If you want to meet Sean Connery, show up at Marathon Man. Maybe he'll be in line in front of you. What kind of responsibility do you feel an actor should take for the violence that seems to be all-pervasive in so many films these days? There's some in your film, not nearly as much as Marathon Man. But do you feel a sense of responsibility on any level for the impact of that on the audience?
Yes, I think in this instance of the Next Man, I was I agree with you. I don't think that there is any rather hackneyed phrase now, but gratuitous violence. But you know, I think there has to be a measure of censorship. I really do. But I feel it should never be in the hands of one. I think it has to be one of the few areas where I think committee works. And but the members of the committee should be, you know, very healthily vetted. But I do think it has to be, because there's too many things gone. I mean, I saw an ad for a picture here that when I came through New York, going to Los Angeles last whatever day it was, and the appeal of it was the idea of firing darts with a gun into some woman in a circus act or something, and it was virtually saying we are guaranteed to make you sick.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's extraordinary.
But that's the audience, though. Doesn't that kind of make you wonder about what you're doing when you go and spend all these months making a movie, and a lot of people will actually spend $3 and $4 to go have an experience that makes them sick? Isn't that weird?
Well, it is, but you asked the question, and I'm saying that I see that, and how do you answer people wanting to go and see that in the first place?
Yes, that's what I wonder about.
Well, I don't think that really was provoked by, well, perhaps it was provoked by films.
I don't know. It's a difficult question to ask why the violence is where it is at this point in our society, why people enjoy it as much as they do.
Well, I think my first reaction is that it's partly because it's something to witness it. You know, it's not happening to you.
One of the things that you have an actual line in The Next Man where you say terrorism is a theater for people to watch and listen, and you say that as a terrorist act is occurring and people are watching on television.
Right, yeah.
And in a way, I think that's related to what we're talking about. The fact that the media carries real violence and that the media also carries fictional violence, and it's all kind of absorbed in the same process.
Well, yeah, I mean, Michael Caine's marvelous at doing these kind of newsreel readings, going straight onto a commercial. You know?
Absolutely. You know, I'm going to ask you about something now that I have been wondering about since I saw, I don't know whether it was in Molly Maguire's or one of the James Bond movies. This is kind of a personal thing. I've never read this anywhere, but I noticed that you have a tattoo on your right forearm.
I have two.
You have two tattoos. And I'm wondering, I'm not going to ask you to show your tattoos, but I'm wondering what prompted you to get a tattoo in the first place?
When I went into the Navy, when I was 16.
That was when you did it, huh?
Oh, yes, of course. But I mean, it's funny. I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever. I mean, about having a tattoo, and people invariably say, "Well, it was probably because you were very drunk one night," you know. And I was frequently drunk, but I didn't need to be drunk to have a tattoo put on.
So you have no regrets. What are the tattoos?
Well, it's a bird.
Well, let's take, as long as it's out, we might as well take a look.
Well, it's a bird. Hair.
Come in on this. It's a hairy bird.
It's a hairy bird. Well, it's a long time ago, you see.
Of course. You didn't have that hair on your arm when you were 16 years old.
But that was 30 years ago now. So it's a bird with a scroll in its mouth that says mother and father, and that's a heart, and that's a dagger through it with thistles, and it says Scotland forever.
Scotland forever. Why do you live in Spain if you have a tattoo that says Scotland forever?
Because Scotland comes under the jurisdiction of England, and the taxis are impossible.
I think we can all easily identify with that, without any question at all. Will you stay with us for a little while and we meet David Douglas Duncan, who was Picasso's close friend and photographer? We're going to show you some really intimate photographs, and we'll be back right after this.